Jayland by Jay Wilburn. Jay was more than a little pissed that he still had to pay for entry after all these years. The park was always changing and updating, but he still had most of it memorized and thought at the very least he was entitled to a discount, but that never happened. He had to wait for the security guard in a ridiculous wig to rifle through his bag. He had everything packed perfectly, including snacks, bottles of water, ponchos, maps, etc. The guard, of course, didn't find anything. Didn't find anything forbidden, and just walked away, leaving Jay to stuff everything back into his bag. Jay was a man of many problems, but few vices. The guards stood together off to the side, pretending he wasn't even there. The turnstile was stiff, but he got it to, let's say, roll, and moved on into the park. The Museum of Haircuts was right there at the front, as always. It had been expanded over the years, but Jay wasn't interested in revisiting that yet. As he passed the large doors, he noticed someone had scrawled graffiti on the wall off to the left in fat black marker, "Jay needs a haircut." The staff was supposed to fix things like that before the park opened, but they were more careless than usual in the off-season, he supposed. All right, it was cold. It should be cold. Even settled in the South, it was January. 2022 had just begun. Many people visited Jayland this time of year, but he always seemed to pay it a visit himself around the turn of the year. Was it habit? Was it ritual? Maybe morbid curiosity? A self-hating act of seeing the place nearly deserted? He wore a blue and white procedural mask to protect him from airborne awfulness. He had done so for a couple years now. Most parks didn't require them anymore, despite all the various variants arriving from overseas. Some parks even advertised they were mask optional. Jay wore his anyway. He had to be extra safe in his condition. Kidney-shaped signs in various colors pointed the way to attractions deeper in the park. There was really only one main path up here in the front with the attractions that had been in place for many years. It was a winding path, easy to get lost upon, but it was well worn by now. There were side streets and small paths leading to the sides that appeared at first glance to have lots of potential, but if you turned down one of those, you quickly found yourself at a dead end. There was a high broad fence blocking each side quest, with signs and faded paint claiming the way beyond was still under construction. Jay had been coming here long enough to know the projects behind those barriers were mostly long abandoned. They weren't roughshod. All right, what does this need to be? Oh, no hyphen. Okay, I'll do that if you insist, computer. They weren't roughshod fences. They were nicely constructed and painted in colors most visitors wouldn't even notice, like hideaway green or blend-in blue, colors the eyes neglected to see. But Jay saw these fences. He knew they were here and why they were. All these little detours had been started with the highest of hopes, but funding and focus had long ago moved on to other efforts deeper in the park. Management remained hopeful, though. You could see it in their social media posts and advertising. Let me make that plural. Always hopeful. He arrived at the Hall of Friendships. This was an old attraction, but still one of his favorites. There was no line today, so the lackadaisical attendant just opened the rope without really looking at Jay, and let him through. All Jay's concerns about being recognized melted away in that moment. At least it was warmer inside. So many of the earlier portraits from school days were faded. A few remained. Need to change the tense on that. A few remained, a small few. These were mostly individuals he remained in contact. Let's say stayed instead of remained, since I already used it. He stayed in contact with after school. Many of the portraits were just Facebook profile pics with information listed that could easily be found online. A few of these were marked as blocked, but Jay couldn't remember why at the moment. Let me take out that capital letter. All right. A select few exhibits were full statues with lots of memorabilia under glass. Jay spent a lot of time here. Many of the things on display he had forgotten, so it was nice to revisit these moments. It was also cold outside, so he lingered a while. Let's say because of that. Because of that. It had been unseasonably warm around the holidays, impossible to know what to wear, but that was over for now. Eventually he did wander back out into the elements. Between attractions, the park had put up memes all over every flat surface they could find. They were up there like advertisements, but really said and meant nothing. In the distance, let me put a comma there. He spotted, let's say located. He located the Tower of Half-Finished Stories. It looked a lot smaller now that he was older. There weren't many incomplete stories added these days. Given enough time, the park might have to get rid of that thing to make room for something more relevant. He smelled it before he saw it. Off to one side, hidden in a shadowy alcove, was the entrance to a sketchy Chinese buffet. He used to love that place, but it always did a number on his inside. Still, he had told himself, okay, I don't know what just happened there. I wasn't even touching anything. All right. Hopefully that's not another mouse giving me trouble. I've had problems. I switched out mice on the computer because I was getting a bad signal from one, and it seemed fine when I switched over to the other, but that screen just flipped all the way through by itself. He smelled it before he saw it. Off to one side, hidden in a shadowy alcove, was the entrance to a sketchy Chinese buffet. He used to love that place, but it always did a number on his inside. Still, he had told himself for years that it was worth it. Not anymore, though. That sort of stuff was off limits to him now. Most of the food in this park was suspect, which was why he brought in his own snacks now. He considered a few of the more adventurous rides when he was young, back when the Hall of Friendships was full of all sorts of characters. He had a personal policy of never saying no to a ride. This usually ended his amusement park visits with feeling quite ill. Let's say with him feeling quite ill. He usually kept everything down, but regretted whatever the last ride was. All right. Still, he'd return every chance he got. These days, he was more about watching everyone else's stuff as they rode the rides. He was a family man now. Most of these parks were about the kids anyway. His family had not come today. He'd see them soon. Their mark was all over this place, but there were things here he'd rather not share with them. Maybe when they were older, but likely that was just an excuse. So he watched the post-trauma coaster run around its insane loops a few times, but he moved on without getting in line today. He'd ridden that damn thing enough times over the years. He felt like he had gotten his fill. Beyond the coasters and drops and all those, let me take out this extra Z I got in there as a typo, and all those rides that whipped you around in pointless circles, he arrived at the lazy river of fading memories. This one had been under construction in secret, but for quite some time. Jay had visited a number of times since the ride opened. I got an extra letter in there too, but hadn't noticed it. He'd see people walking around dripping wet, people he thought he might recognize but couldn't place. Where had they found a water ride? He had never seen so much as a water slide in all his years attending this place. Then he'd spotted signs. Others pointed them out too. He avoided this section of the park for a while, but now, even on a cold day when a water ride would be terrible, he couldn't help but to stop by and watch the slow inner tubes drift around and around. He didn't know what this was. He didn't know why. Let me fix that. He didn't know why this was even here. What was the attraction? Why even include it? Of course, he did know what had caused. Of course, he did know what had caused it. What made it necessary. Some of the detail was lit up on the trauma coaster. If you stayed until the fireworks, you could see those causes lit up from anywhere in the park. Still, he hated that this was here. He hated the fact this was here. All right. It wasn't even well maintained. There were dry spots. The water that moved the riders around was evaporating from the bridges and platforms around. Jay couldn't even see all the twists and turns through the haze. Words and names escaped him as he stayed here too long. It was difficult to remember anything clearly except the present. Being here, looking at this ride, was like being slowly erased. Yet he lingered a while longer before wandering off in a sort of daze. All right. Let me add here, he passed a closed running track that he'd used in the past. He wondered if anyone would ever open it again. He supposed no one came to an amusement park to run. Okay. All right, let me mark off something here that I had written down. That's done. Okay. He could remember his name, but it wasn't. I'll put a comma there. But it wasn't a clear thing. He shouldn't have come here alone. This sort of thing happened to him more when he was alone and away from home. He felt unanchored. That was his word for it. Others called it confusion or even suspected it might be early onset, not unset, let's say onset. Early onset something more serious. Tests were pending. Nothing definite now, and none of that was going to help him with his immediate problem. He couldn't remember how he got here, nor where he was going. When he was clearer in his head, Jay tried to train himself not to walk away from uncomfortable situations. It wasn't exactly fight or flight, but it was similar. When he was confused, put a comma there, he felt like he needed to flee that feeling or to search out something more familiar. Maybe that was how everyone with some form of dementia really felt when they were having episodes. He drifted past the mood swings as they tilted, twirled, and spun over his head. The lights made him angry, but then suddenly he was sad. Why weren't mood swings ever really anything emotionally positive? He generally tried to cope by being still, by staying quiet. When he was young and angry, he tried to hit things to get all that anger out, but he discovered over time that sort of thing just made him feel worse. Being still and quiet and just trying not to be an a-hole to everyone usually worked best. This also helped him not to wander as much when he was confused. Okay, to put a comma. But it still happened. It still happened from time to time. Like today. All right. He passed a section, say a chaotic section of the park labeled desperate money grabs. The rides were small and packed together like a kids section of the park. But these were no kids rides. They were slapped together things that were missing tracks and threatened anyone who dared to ride them. Jay, let's do a new thing here. Jay moved on. Behind fading paint, he saw images and words he associated with his father. Most references to the man had long ago been covered over. There were still hints and shadows around, though. The Wild and Woolly Seizures ride was closed for maintenance. It had been shut down for years now, but the flashing lights still gave Jay a headache. Let's say he wandered. He wandered away, looking for anything familiar. Spotting signs for the exits, he figured that was his best bet. He had spent enough time here for one day. Back with his family, back home, back in the present was where he needed to be. The exit was through the overstuffed gift shop. All parks seemed to pull that trick nowadays. Everything was too expensive. All of it was on display to make you believe that buying any of it would make you happy. It was all cheap, though. All of it broke soon after you left the park. It was all small and imperfect replicas of the experiences from earlier times. Best just to leave that stuff behind and move on with what needed doing out in the real world. Jay finally found the exit and felt a little more himself again. He pushed open the last door and stepped out into the cold, bright light, leaving Jayland behind once again.